Everything we do here at James Project focuses on caring for vulnerable women and children because we believe that's the call that God has placed on every one of us as Christians.
We are back at the James Project podcast with a new guest today. Her name is Caroline. Hi, Caroline. How are you?
Hello. Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being with us. So, you have been part of the James Project for quite a while. Can you tell us a little bit about where you're from and um, tell us more about you.
Yeah. So I'm in Kansas City. I've lived in Kansas City since I got married in 2016. So we're going on, what is that, 9 years now?
Ah,
So it's home. I did grow up in a small town in Southwest Missouri. Um, Growing up, I wasn't really part of anything like the James Project. I didn't really have a church community. I knew who God was. We went to church on Christmas and Easter, but it wasn't something we talked about a lot at home. We didn't read the Bible. We didn't, I like to say, I knew who God was, but I didn't know him, right? So I
mm,
didn't know what it was like to live and share that experience. But because I knew who he was, there was always like a lot of curiosity there. Um, from a very young age, I remember I have a really funny memory of I went to a church that wasn't mine at a play at a church. And at the end of the play, they said, if you believe that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, raise your hand. And I think it was like 7 or 8, and I raised my hand, and I was not there with anybody I knew very well. And then they called me to the front of the church, and they were like, do you give your life to the Lord? And I was like, yeah, like I think I already did that, right? I just didn't comprehend the whole thing because the structure of that church was so different from like the Catholic church that I grew up in
mhm.
and had been to a few times throughout my youth. And but it's such a testament to like God's power and a child too, of how accepting you can be of like you just know that, right? You just know when you're called to God. And even though it wasn't a constant in my life, it was clearly that he was always there. So then when I was around my mid 20s, I started dating my now husband, and his family had always been involved in the church, and we were living in his hometown at the time. And I joined their church. And then a few years later, he and I got married, and we joined our own church, and because it was a different city, and just flourished from there. We volunteered in the youth programs. We were attending church every day. We were active in Bible studies, and it really changed who I was. You know, who I understood who I was. It didn't change who I was. It changed my understanding of myself and in a great way. And we were newlyweds. We didn't have a lot. And we were sitting in our new church one day, and they started talking about Shadow of His Wings.
Mhm.
And I looked at my husband and I said, I'm going to go there. I'm going to do that. I have to do that. And he was like, okay. And we figured it out from there. So that's kind of the starting point.
Wow, that is very cool. And so, Shadow of His Wings, just for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, that's the name of the children's home under the James Project umbrella, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks. I didn't cause a lot of confusion there, but yes.
Right. All right. So, were you nervous about? I mean, it sounds like you were very confident to look at him and say, "I'm going to go there." Did you have any reservations? Were you nervous about it?
I there was so much lack of consideration when I just knew that I needed to go, that
Mhm.
the nerves were more of the small town Midwest girl that the furthest I went away was like 3 hours to college. So I was more nervous of exploring and seeing new things and not knowing what to expect because I wasn't going with my husband. I was
Mhm.
going by myself with a group of people that I sort of knew through church at that point in time. So
Wow.
I was nervous, but not about the mission work. I was nervous about just new things in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's really neat. That because I think sometimes when we overthink things, and we try to overanalyze them. I mean, the first time we went, I know that we were all on board because I took my kids and my mom, and when they were young, they were 12 and 10. But as they got closer and we had to like make the commitment, I was more
Mhm.
hesitant because I was thinking about all that would go into taking two kids and, all of the packing and, because it all fell on me. And so
Yeah,
I was much
yeah.
more hesitant and I'm like, I don't know. And my daughter was like, no, we need to. And so we ended up going. But
Yeah,
I
it's
think,
always one of those. Oh, I'm sorry, cut you
no,
off.
no, that's okay.
It's
Go
it's
ahead.
always one of those where as you get closer, there's the feeling of excitement, but also like what's God telling me? Why is God telling me I need to go here right now? But
Hmm. Hmm.
that's why we're called to listen.
Yes, it is. So what kind of initial expectations did you have for the trip?
Yeah, so really I set an expectation for myself that I knew going in that I wanted it to be more than just a week of connecting with these kids on the project. I
Hmm.
wanted to find a way to serve and connect to the community. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I knew I went there with an intention and expectation to do something greater than for 8 days.
Hmm.
Um, as far as going to the project, my expectations were that it would be a lot rougher than it was, you know? There's a team house that's very nice for you to sleep in.
Hmm.
The amenities aren't a five-star hotel, but they're definitely not sleeping in a hammock with a mosquito net around you. You have
Hmm.
cooks that take care of you and running water and enough clean water to drink as much as you need and
Right.
things like that. And then just the organization of the project and the gratitude. I did not expect the adults and the connection with the house parents and the staff there that we
Mhm.
created and that you get every time you go there. Just that was really unexpected.
Yeah. Yeah, they are so welcoming there, aren't they? It's like just like one big family when you show up. So it's so neat to have those connections because they really do look forward to you going and meeting you and knowing about why you would travel so far to see them,
Yeah.
you know.
And it's just a testament really to like God's power in those people's hearts because to they have children coming in and out all the time, difficult cases. They
Mhm.
have mission teams, guests coming in and out all the time. And every time you see them, they welcome you with open arms and they're so gracious with letting you kind of do things your way. And I imagine that would be difficult and having, running a household and running a children's home, but then having people come in and do things slightly different week after week. But they hold such grace for you as a guest that, like, I think that's step one and why it feels like God is so present from immediately walking into the project.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. I mean, to be able to keep your heart open to so many different people and so many different ways of doing things that they bring, it's pretty remarkable that they can just, I mean, I'm just, as you're saying that, I'm picturing if someone were coming into my house every other week.
Right, right.
Run things. I would not
and
like that so much. And yeah, so it is, I never thought about it that way. It's really incredible how they can do that. And it
yeah,
speaks to their call in the ministry too, to be able to do that. Like they feel like God has called them to be able to welcome so many different um, ways of doing things and different ministry types, different activities. And even when you're there, like they shift really easily if the plans change and or we
yes,
want to throw an extra playtime in or they're very gracious to even do that. So I
they are.
appreciate that. Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah.
It's a very special part. I'm very grateful for the staff there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So what was your group like going down? Like you said you kind of knew them from church. What
Yeah, so we had a wonderful group. So we had one of our pastors and then a co-leader who had been down like 13 times or something by that point. And so was very well versed in kind of the way things went. And then we had two families, or sorry, we had a mom and dad and like two of their teens. They're like 13 and 14 or something. And then a mom and a daughter, a team total of 15 or 17. So we were a pretty big team that year. And of course, the ladies who aren't with their spouses bunk with in a room full of ladies. And
Mhm.
that's quite the bonding experience. It's really, really fun.
Mhm.
And so in a matter of 24 hours, you're friends for life. And because of the experiences that you share, but also just you're living together and you're all there for a positive reason. So
Mhm.
you tend to just get along. Um, And we were really, really good at lifting each other up and expanding people and letting them come out of their comfort zones.
Mm,
And that is definitely why the project, or the first mission trip I went on, was so impactful.
yeah. Yeah, you really can't stay in your comfort zone living in a
Yeah,
room with 5 or 6 other women
right,
in
right.
one bed.
But not in a bad way, right? It's
No,
just,
not in a bad way.
yeah.
You
And
would just be
so,
a very closed off person if you were able to do that
right?
because you're in such close quarters the whole time. You've got people
Yeah.
snoring next to you or getting up in the middle of there's just
Yep.
all kinds of challenges. It is very cushy for sure as far as missionary work, in my opinion, but we
Yes.
are still sleeping in bunk beds, and the bunk beds are nicer now than they used to be. But yeah, and
Oh, one night, this was not the first trip, but we were bunking, it was our ladies' room, and somebody on our group had a birthday, and the staff at the project found out. So they came and lit the loudest firecrackers I've ever heard at like 2 in the morning on the front patio, which is right where the rooms are.
Mhm.
And oh my gosh, the chaos that ensued in that 3 seconds.
Oh, that's
And
precious.
we all looked at each other afterwards. We're like, I guess we really found out what our true characters were. And
Right?
the funny thing was, we were joking about something before going to bed. And
Mhm.
our friend Levon said, "Don't worry, Caroline, if something happens in the night, I'll protect you." And then when when the fireworks went off, she hid under
Mhm.
the bed. And
So much
so
for
then after that,
protection.
she was like, "I'm sorry, I said I'd protect you, and I was the first one under the bed." I was like, no hard feelings. Like, I did not react how I thought I would react in that situation either. So,
Oh, they do have such a sense of humor down there as well.
yeah.
I'm not sure how I would have reacted to that either.
I know. Really just jumping out of bed and throwing the lights on and everybody screaming. But
Right, right. Yeah, that sounds about, yeah, normal.
yeah.
Oh, that's so what would you say you might have been most nervous about for that first trip?
Definitely just the time away. It was a new country, and I don't speak Spanish. And yes, we're
Mhm.
going with a group of English speakers, and they provide somebody who can help you translate. But
Mhm.
that was a concern. And once you're there, you realize it's not, because
Right.
God's love speaks louder than anything. And
Mhm.
so, you learn hola and adios and cómo estás, and you break your way into saying hi to those kids and to the staff. And then from there, you just let actions speak and God
Yeah.
takes over. So,
Mhm. Yeah. And those kids just want to be loved on and played with. So, you don't even
hmm
have to speak. You can just run around and play tag.
oh yeah. Or you can speak broken Spanish and make them laugh really hard.
Right.
So I'm terrified maybe I said something inappropriate, but I didn't mean to.
Right, right. It's plausible.
Yeah.
I'm sure it wouldn't be the first time they heard something like that.
Yeah, but I think they know your intentions, right? Because like if
Yeah.
the first part of it is like you're asking them, "How are you?" and then you say something maybe a little off, though, and they laugh, you're like, they know you're not being rude.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what were you most excited about, do you think?
Oh gosh. The same things that kind of made me nervous, right? So
Mhm,
I was nervous about a new country and a place that I didn't know, and being traveling alone for the first time, but I was also most excited about that because I think you can tell by this point in the conversation, I'm really kind of don't dip your toe in, just jump all in and figure it out from there type of person. And so anything that sort of brought me nervousness and concern was also the reason I wanted to overcome that. I was more excited than I was nervous.
mhm,
And so it really outweighed any concerns that I had. And I was so excited to experience things of a different culture, because people do things differently, and just the way people raise their families, their values around silly things like food and appropriate clothing and things like that just differs from country to country.
mhm,
And going in with a mission trip, you're also bringing Christian values, and the way things are taught across countries is we all believe in the same God, but
mhm.
sometimes there's different translations of the Bible, and I know they're all supposed to be the same, but
Mhm.
to go and experience that and actually see that,
Mhm.
there was a lot of curiosity there, and I was
Yeah.
excited about that. But I really don't think I was excited enough. I should.
Oh,
I dampened it down, because now when I go, my heart leaps. Like if I have a
yeah.
calendar date of that I get to go, I'm just like, yes, this is everything. And
Yeah.
but you can only learn that by going the first time. So
Right. Right. And so listening to you, I know we didn't talk about this before, but it sounds like your personality to just jump right in and not
hmm
get, not dip your toe in, but also the culture of the church that you went with sounds like they were very very mission oriented. They'd been before. They had a, they probably, I mean, I'm just guessing, I would imagine they presented it in a very confident and positive light. Do you think that kind of played a role too? Because I'm just thinking about people who have never been before, but they're maybe not part of a church like that, and maybe how that would affect your nervousness. Do you know what I mean? Do you think that was
yeah.
part of the
Absolutely.
confidence?
Having people who had been having a church that had been involved in the project for many, many years, there was a really strong understanding of the values of the James Project. And that fueled, the reason why we were going, right? We knew the James Project was Christian focused, and we knew about how they were teaching kids and the structure of their programs to always be God first, including, they have the structure of the houses where it's a actual married couple that takes care of these children, and that is to mirror what a Christian household should look like. So we're, just every little corner seemed like the right thing to support. And so the church was very supportive of it. The teams that had experienced were very, or the team members who had experienced it were very supportive of it. So it definitely helped with the confidence. And, there was no reason to question that I was making the wrong decision in going.
Right.
And for people who don't have that, I think you just need to speak with anybody who's gone, or research what the project is about. Talk to the directors and board members if you can, or if you know them, and just get an idea of the values that the project holds through each of those people that represent the project. Because if you do that, you won't have a question about whether it's the right place to put your Christian beliefs and support.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Right. So speaking of firsts, though, there were a lot of other firsts for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, I
tell
mean,
us.
yeah, first mission trip, first time traveling alone, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the like first impression was that this country is beautiful. There's a there's a lot of lower income areas that it's just very, very different from what you would see driving down the street from here. So there's a drive from Guatemala City to Monjas that takes a few hours, and it's a great bonding time with your team, but it also is so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, everything seems colorful there,
Yeah.
and it's strange perspective to say, because there's also a lot of darkness that we deal with and hear about when you're doing the mission work, because you're working with trauma kids, and you're going and you're feeding people who are don't have resources to feed their families and have to sacrifice feeding their families or taking care of their families to do one or the other. So
Mm-hmm.
um, it is still a very beautiful place. Oh, another first was I was new to living in my faith, so this is a big one. This is a big part of it. I had, like I said, I joined the church maybe when I was like 24-ish, and at this
Mm-hmm.
point I was 28. So
Mm-hmm.
I was new to reading the Bible. I didn't have a plethora of things I could quote. I didn't have all of the parables memorized to make things make sense when I tell stories about how God loves us and shows grace. I didn't feel like I had the like factual armor ready to go out and be a disciple. I didn't pray out loud. I never prayed with the group verbally out loud, um, or led something like that. I had never just, or wasn't bold in my faith and talking about it, and I lacked a confidence there. So going on the mission trip, it was the first time I ever prayed out loud. I prayed over a family while we were delivering food baskets,
Mm-hmm.
and it was comforting. Like I was saying, the staff and the employees are so welcoming, And they're so bold in their faith that it really built a confidence in me to be able to go out and say, yes, I'm a Christian and I believe in God and he is my savior. Um, so of the first, I think that's the biggest thing is I learned to do that there for the first time.
Yeah. 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 I think I'm thinking back of the first time we met, and the staff, the culture around their faith, and just they're just walking it out every day. Like it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
happen in my normal life in circles that I'm involved in, that we're, doing the work of God, his hands and feet, intentionally all day long. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
it is hard to go down there and be bold until you get there and you're like, oh wait, no, this is what we all do. You know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it is a norm down there, and especially in that, with that organization and what their goals are, and their values. So yeah, it does give you a sense of confidence and boldness to be, because you're just joining. You're not having to step out and be the first one. You're not having to, ruffle somebody's feathers. You just get to participate and join them in that. So yeah, I hear you there.
Yeah.
It is
It's a
about.
really great space to practice your discipleship because you want to carry that everywhere else, right? You don't want to just be a disciple on your mission trips, but to
Mhm.
be able to know you can say things and learn from people that are doing it because it's constant. So you're just constantly learning and listening to God's message and seeing him in everything. So it's like immersion, right? If you're going to learn a
Mhm.
language, they say go
Right.
somewhere and be immersed in it. This is the same thing as if you want to learn to be a disciple, go immerse yourself in it.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah. So, what was it? Were you really nervous to pray out loud for that first time? Like,
Yes, very much.
I'm not
You
sure
know,
I
it's
did
just
well on my first trip, so I'm proud of you.
thank you.
Mhm.
It was probably one of the shorter prayers said that day or the shorter prayers that I've said, but you know, God knows what's truly lying in your heart and I did exactly and said exactly what was intended. So we'll just trust in
Yes.
that.
Yeah. So, what were some of the most impactful moments for you on that first trip?
Ugh, a lot. There's a lot of them. One of them that I'll start with was actually off the project, which is a great thing about these mission trips is that you spend a lot of time with the kids and the people of the project. And like I said, it's a great example of how you can go out in the community and disciple. But then you actually get to go out in the community and disciple and represent the project and spread their message among the community. So one of the first things that to this day is if I ever need to go back and align my faith and be like, do I trust in God? Do I know who He is? Um, is this moment? And we went to a women's prison outside the project. It was even outside the city of Mohas where the project is
Mhm.
located. And it was a very, very hot day and it was sunny. And to go in, you have to wear long, full length skirts as women. Men have to wear pants. So we're like standing outside against this dark concrete wall, and the sun is just beating on us. So we're hot and sweaty. Every reason to be grumpy, but we were not. And I remember Brian Applegate, the assistant director, asked me, have you ever discipled at a church before? And I said, I've never to disciple. Like I've never done anything like this
Right.
before, much
Right.
less, or I'm sorry, at a prison. We were at a prison, not at a church. Have you ever discipled at a church? Have you ever discipled at a prison before?
Mhm.
And as I was very shocked, and then I became kind of worried. And we walk in, and the women had just finished washing their laundry, so there's like bars across the ceiling. It's open air, and there was lots of pinks and orange fabrics, just damp, just hanging over these bars. And the sun is beating down, so there's this orange, kind of pinkish, hazy glow, and it's steamy because of all the moisture in the fabric. And it's a
Mhm.
small space, and there's for every one bunk bed, I think there was like four people sleeping in that because it was just overcrowded. And the women were so excited to see us. And we did a craft with them and, told them that they're created in God's image and had a wonderful message. But at the end, we were playing a song, and it was a Christian song in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish again, so I didn't know exactly what it was. But I was
Mhm.
drawn to this woman across the room, and she was standing there like this. And I went and I locked my forearms with her, and we held each other and I still get choked up about it. And we just cried together and we had our eyes closed. And I know I will see her in a garden someday.
Mhm.
And that moment is never less real than it,
Mhm.
it's still as real today as it was then. And
Wow.
so that was life changing for me.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
whew, it's a hard one to get
Yeah.
through. Even though
Yeah.
it's like a cry, but it's so happy and so pure. I mean, there was moments where we went and delivered food baskets. So
Mhm.
you take food to different families in the community. You get like a week's worth of food, maybe some cleaning supplies.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to deliver to one woman that was associated with the Redeemed program, which is our program that helps support women in the community. And she wasn't home. So we went to the neighbor's house and knocked on their door and said, we have this food for you. We didn't know who she was. She didn't know who we were. Um, would you like it? And she was just speechless because her husband had left that morning with their 4-year-old daughter to walk to America so he could get a job and then send back money. And she was left there with 2 young toddlers and an infant. And her nephew was around 17, give or take a year, was supposed to be the man of the house. So he was there. Um, she had nothing and she was left with nothing. And she lost a child that day and she lost a husband that day. And we're placed on her doorstep with supplies.
And prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. That's very, I'm sure that moment is as real for her as well.
Yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
is a re-centering for her faith.
Yeah. And
Wow.
then one other thing that is definitely worth mentioning is that's always impactful and it's consistent every day on the mission trip is the kids at the project.
Mm.
So when you go, you'll hear stories of, how these kids were treated before they were brought to the project or the reason why they were brought to the project. And it's a lot of serious abuse and neglect.
Mhm.
And they have every reason to be distrusting of adults. They have every reason to hold anger. And the minute they're shown God's love through the service at the project, they're
Mhm.
so gracious. I was talking before about how kids just respond to things and they seem to understand things intuitively that we block out as adults.
Mm.
They want hugs, they want to play, they want to do everything to get to know you and feel your love and feel God's love. And it's
Mm.
amazing to be able to
Yeah.
walk through what they walk through and still find joy.
Yeah. And keep their hearts open to
Mm-hmm.
receive that kind of love from others that they don't even know. And they have no reason to trust, no proof that they should trust us, but they do. And that speaks to the way that they're taught at the project about what God's love is like and the healing that it can have for them through all that trauma. You know what I mean? To be
Yeah.
able to open their hearts up again. It's
Yeah.
pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Mhm. That's a lot of impactful moments in one trip.
Yes. And just think when you go year after year, you can get more.
Right. Right. So actually, how many trips have you been down?
It's funny. I was trying to count. Mission trips, I think I've been on 4 and I've been down to the project 6 times.
Okay, gotcha. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Okay. So we also wanted to talk about and touch on the differences because there are, you talked about the abuse and neglect that these kids face. And I'm sure I have no doubt that there are kids in America that experience that same type of
Yeah.
environment. Um, but there's also a teen pregnancy home on the property. And I know that you've seen it as well. And in those girls, the way that they love their babies that are not conceived by choice and in a healthy relationship, right? So
Right.
what do you think the difference is in in the way that they approach that whole process down there?
Y- Yeah. And I mean, we know the ultimate answer is God, right?
Mhm.
And but that kind of seems simple to put it that way, but um just to kind of touch on the ugly, the these girls are 12, 13, 14 years old. They're
Mhm.
pregnant. It's majority of the time through rape. I haven't heard of a case that it wasn't.
Right.
And then more often than not, it's a family member.
Mhm.
And so think about, that's scary. That's not God's work, right?
Mhm.
That's definitely the devil. That's evil at work.
Mhm.
And but the creation of life is God's work.
Mhm.
And these girls, my guess is they don't know what it's like to be loved. They
Mm.
don't know any living example of love.
Mhm.
Um, and what a miracle it is that they get to have a baby and experience love.
Mhm.
Um, and again, that's not conscious. That's just the way I see it.
Right.
Um, um, it's the outcome, of new life. Um, it's just amazing. And I go around on this a lot because people do ask, well, why do you have these girls have their babies,
Mhm. Mhm.
And there's things like I could theorize about just the community structure. Abortion is very illegal. If they have an abortion, they'll be outcast. They have to have community to survive.
Mhm.
Um, they don't really participate in education systems. So most of the time, these girls aren't even, going through fourth grade, much less have ambitions to go to college and have some big fancy career.
Mhm.
We were talking about social norms between societies before. You
Mhm.
know, rape and incest is not a norm, and that is not God. Um, but we do have to understand there is some norm of like having children at a young age and being a mother, and that is a social structure.
Mhm.
Um, but all these are just theories, right? We do know that we've just got to bring it back to God.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and I like what you said about the idea of of having the opportunity to love someone, um, and be loved by that baby, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's also like you're saying, they're not involved, they don't have the money to participate in the education program. So they don't know that they are missing out when they have this child. They're not losing, they they don't see what they have to lose because they don't have it to begin with. Um, and so, yeah, it's such a hard because people ask me as well, and it's, because
Mm-hmm.
it's so sad to see a 13-year-old have to have a baby. And down there, if you're under 14, you're obligated, they have to do a C-section by law.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's a
The
whole
safety.
dramatic, so you think about why are we doing this? Why? But I think you're right in the way that God is the maker of life, and there can be something good that comes out of something so tragic. And I'm thankful for the project and the opportunity they have to help these children have these babies and then teach them how to love them and give them a different picture of what their life can be like. Then they don't have to keep repeating the same cycle. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. And the benefit of them being at the project is they the moms still go to school.
Mhm.
The parents, the house parents will take care of the babies while the moms go to school.
Mhm.
They get good nutrition so the babies are not malnourished.
Mhm.
So we add in a factor of education for them. We add in the factor of nutrition. Of course, God's message and living out God's calling on us is huge, and teaching them as well, really how to be a good parent and a loving parent. And like you said, break that cycle, because we don't want to have to, we don't think, oh, we need to change all of Guatemalan society and the way they do things. But it is understood that if a mother can get through a certain level of education, she can get a job at, a bakery, or she can start her small business selling eggs, and she can have resources of that education to help support her family. It'll look a lot different than what we think of, improved education and experience in America. But thankfully, the project is able to offer that in a way that very much um, improves the missing pieces of Guatemalan culture, and
Mhm.
improves just the spirituality of that.
Mhm.
So I don't want to say
Yeah.
there's something wrong with their society, and that it's just we have to understand that to help us understand this as well.
Yeah, I think rape and incest are definitely wrong.
Right, right.
Just to clarify, but I know what you mean. There are still young families. It's not always because of that. And hopefully changes will occur in their culture as far as that goes, rape and
Yeah,
incest.
yeah.
Because it's so
We
sad.
want that.
Right.
We
And
want that change.
right. And didn't we see a statistic the other day that was even worse than we thought? I don't remember. I thought Tiffany shared
Yes,
something.
I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was over 40% of girls that were like 13 or 14 were pregnant by rape.
Mm,
Don't quote me on that because I can't
I
remember,
know.
but
I
it
know.
was something where you are just shocked. And yes, that's a God problem. So when
Hmm.
I say that, I mean that is yes, we have to be the hands and feet and go out and teach these messages, but that
Hmm.
is a lack of people's understanding of what God's message is. And
Hmm.
so if we, as not just the James Project, as people, as Christian believers, go out into the world and spread God and the message of God and His love, then the God problem becomes smaller and God becomes bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. Yeah. And it's generational too. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of these fathers or uncles that are abusing these young girls, there's a why behind the what there. It's a broken
Mm-hmm.
system.
Mm-hmm.
uh, And so they all need
Yeah.
prayer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, the repercussions for these things, a lot of times these men aren't put in prison, they aren't, arrested, and that is another thing that needs to be fixed. I would never say that these girls being raped and, being assaulted by anybody, much less family members, is okay. It's just
Mhm.
God creating life is okay. And these girls instinctively know that, and they love their babies from the instant they know that they're pregnant, and it shows. There was one 12-year-old girl, and she used to rub her little belly, and she'd be like, "This is my baby. This is my baby." And she'd be like, "Come look, come feel." And she was so excited. And, my brain is kind of like, this is strange. I am looking at a child and she wants me to just hold her baby. But
Mhm.
the love is clear, and,
Mhm.
that's what's important.
Mhm. And I think for those girls too, when they get to the project, they are so loved on that
Hmm.
and taught about God's love that it just easily flows out of them to their babies.
Yeah.
Um and that's a miracle in itself because I don't know if that had happened to me at a young age. Do you know what I mean? Like try to put
Right.
yourself in that position and think, would I be able to be excited about the result of something so horrendous? It would be
Hmm.
really hard. So I think it speaks to the structure of the project and the way that these girls are loved on from the moment they get there and told
Hmm.
that they're valuable. I mean, they've been, I mean, you have to have some level of disdain for someone to do that. It's not, do you know what I mean? Like they've
Right.
been made to feel like they're just something to be used. So for
Yeah.
them to understand that they actually have worth and value in God's eyes, no matter what happened to them, and it wasn't their fault, and what the result is not their fault, but can become something beautiful in their lives and change the
Hmm.
trajectory of their lives in a positive way, speaks so much to what the project and especially Casa Maria, the teen pregnancy home can do for them.
Yes. Yeah. I completely agree. And yeah, I have to say, I don't know what their perspective is whenever they're pregnant and they're not in the project. I do only know pregnant teens within the project walls, and they are very loving and accepting of their babies and very excited about them.
Hmm. They are. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so what do you think, what were the hardest parts about the transition home for you? Because I mean, you're immersed, like you were talking about. You're living with
Hmm.
these people for 8 days, you're bunking with each other, you're sharing food, you're sharing a bathroom, like all of these things. And then all of a sudden you come home and you're back to normal life. What's that transition like?
Yeah, the first time you go, or for me anyways, it was very, very difficult to transition home. And then, before I had left, I was just sort of an unhappy place as far as I wasn't loving my job. I just was doing that mid-20s sort of struggle of like, what's next? I feel like I should be further than I am. I created this image in my mind of what was perfect for a 28-year-old, and I felt like I hadn't met it. So there was a lot of just like internal discomfort. And then you
Mhm.
go on this mission trip and you see God everywhere for 8 days. Everything from the conversations you have at night when you're bunking with your mission team friends, and you go out and you're doing your morning walk with your coffee to wake up, and the kids are running up to hug you when they're going to school, and you go out in the community and you're just constantly able to give and serve, and your every calling God puts on you, you're able to act on it, and it
Mhm.
feels so good. And then you come home, and every calling that God puts on you, it feels like you can't always act that out. You go back to your 9 to 5 and you have to fit in with the rules and the structures of your job. Whether it's good or bad, it's just, you're
It's
not
different.
going out looking for opportunities to be like, God, tell me what to do. Tell me how to help this person. And you can do that through work, just in different
Mhm.
ways. And I hadn't figured that out yet.
Mhm.
So, it caused a lot of issues like within my job. I just became grumpy when people were ungrateful and complained a lot. And um, it exacerbated how unhappy I was. And when I left there and transitioned jobs a few months later, my boss said, yeah, you've been very different since you came back from that trip. You just have a lot less patience for people, which is interesting because I felt so connected to God. You'd think I'd be more patient, but it was like a culture shock sort of thing. And over those, I'd say there was a 6-month window where I just wanted to serve, 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 serve. But in order to do that, God had gifted me with things like a job and a home to take care of, and all these certain responsibilities that allowed me to go to the project. So, um,
Mhm.
growing that understanding. So there's a big, on your first trip, I would say always stay connected to your team. Have a
Mhm.
follow-up buddy that you guys can check in with for at least 3 months, if not longer. You're bonded, but make sure that your buddy's doing okay.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I don't want that to deter anybody because, I mean, obviously, I've been back multiple times. I'm on the board now. I've done fundraising. I was on fire. It just took time to figure out where to put that fire.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it feels more restrictive up here in our
Mm-hmm.
normal
Mm-hmm.
lives because there are responsibilities that we have to take care of. And so it makes me think of Brother Lawrence, his book, Practicing the Presence of God, and how he felt just as spiritual washing the pots and pans as he did in prayer, and getting to
Yeah.
that point where we can do that, where it doesn't have to be an 8-day mission trip that we feel like we're walking out our calling every day. Because it does feel much more restrictive when we're doing normal life. And it takes a
Yes.
certain level of intentionality and self awareness to slow down enough to be like, okay, I'm at the grocery store. Who can I bless? Before you, and
Mm-hmm.
show me someone to bless when I go in there or minister to, or with a smile, even. It doesn't, you don't have to stand in the grocery aisle and share the gospel, but
Right.
just make sure keep your head up and look around for those opportunities. It's harder to find them, it feels like. And then
Mm-hmm.
when you do find them, sometimes it feels harder to walk those out because you're alone. Most of the
Yep.
time you're not with a group of 15 other people that are all on board and prepared and ready and doing the same thing. So yeah, it is a very isolating transition, I think, for sure. And
Yes.
the other
Yeah.
thing I think too is you've had this massive experience where, your life has been changed and people don't understand it because they didn't go with you. So everybody that you're
Mm-hmm.
encountering in your day-to-day life, they may see something different about you, but they have no idea what it is. And they don't know what to say, and they don't know how to engage, and they don't know if it's a good thing, if it's a bad thing. It makes it very challenging.
Right, it does. And from the perspective of, coming home too, people see the change, but then they
Mhm.
try to relate to you. And it, as much as, we're spending time here talking about the experiences and really expanding on them, there's nothing like living it. And the only people that really relate are the people who are on the trip with you, even from trip to trip.
Right?
And so to go from somebody understanding you every day to feeling like nobody understands you, that's
Mhm.
hard too.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a really, really challenging experience. So, how was it relating back into your, like coming back into your marriage and with your husband? Did you have challenges there? I don't think we talked about this, but
No, I think it was more strengthening than it was because he understands me so well, That's part of
hmm
the process of being married is you
hmm
know each other really well, or we hope.
hmm
um I would say from the beginning, heard of the project. I looked at him. I said, I'm gonna go. He said, go. We didn't have a lot of resources, so it really set the standard in our marriage because this is really early on when we were first married. Of we were willing to step out and stretch things at home sometimes to make service possible.
mm
And I can't say that we're always good about it, but definitely doing this so early on in our marriage was impactful and a reminder and kind of set the standard for that. I
mm.
was thinking about that this morning, and remembered for the first time that things were so thin in our resources at home that in order to renew my passport for my first mission trip, I found some like survey panel or something to participate in. And I
Oh,
went,
yeah.
it was like about dog food or something. And I went one night after work in a snowstorm and spent my 2 hours talking about dog food. And they handed me a $150 check at the end, and I went and renewed my passport.
Wow.
So that's
That's
part of how
amazing.
I was able to go.
Yeah. Wow. Look at that, those opportunities. But it must have really helped you understand your husband a little bit more too, and his willingness to be generous and sacrificial to do that too for you to go because he wasn't getting to participate, right?
Right. He wasn't going. Just the idea of sending your wife off to a foreign country by herself. I think that's um, just a testament to his faith and how important this was to me.
Mhm.
And the whole thing was like, you can only see God in it, and
Yeah.
just a testament to his trust in it as well. With, like I said, okay, it does cost money to go, and you have to either fundraise or financially support it. And we
Mhm.
found a way because it was the right thing to do.
Oh, that's wonderful. And dog food, who would have thought,
What's funny is I've looked up like that sort of like panel thing or that company thing or
Mhm.
any that same company since then. Nothing. Like I think it was just created by God for me in that moment. And
That's
like
so
it wasn't real, but it was.
Mhm. That's amazing. And you had to be willing to sacrifice that time and energy to go and do it though too, so that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a little practice, I guess, for going out alone because I had to go to this random building with these random people and have this random meeting. But like, there's a room full of 50 people talking about their pets.
Mhm. Oh,
And
that's so
it was very uncomfortable and out of my comfort zone. And that was just practice.
yeah, great steps of obedience that we don't even
Yeah.
realize what we're obeying for, like what
Hmm.
preparation he has in mind for us through that obedience, but good for you to step out and do that.
Oh, thanks. But yeah, it's such a funny small thing that I would never have tied God to. But when you put it in the whole picture, it's like he really was there
Yeah,
in a big
yeah,
way.
yep. Preparing in more than one way. That's
Hmm.
awesome. So, what do you think, like thinking back on that first trip, what were some of the results when you came back? I mean, I know it was hard to transition, but and you decided to do something different with your work and different things, but what were some of the changes that also came about as a result of that first trip?
Just that I could make my faith into actions. So we talked
Mm,
about, speaking about our faith and praying out loud. So it's a big thing, but a small thing too. Of I really enjoy praying out loud and in groups now, and
mm,
it wasn't immediate when I came back. It took practice and things, but now if I'm in a group and I ask people if somebody wants to lead to pray, I really have to like count one, two, and like pause because I will. I'll be like I'm pretty open with
mhm,
sharing my faith journey and things like that, and so
mhm,
I again have to like pause and count because I don't want to traumatize anybody with how ready I am to share. Sometimes I don't want to be
mhm,
overbearing, um,
mhm,
but at the same time, that would never have happened if I hadn't gone. Well, I can't say never because it's part of God's plan, but it
Right.
wouldn't have happened as quickly um, as if I hadn't gone on the mission trip at that point in
Mm,
time, right?
yeah.
Uh, yeah. And so other actions too, just like understanding that continuing to support the project. So I knew when I went, I wanted to support the project or those people or this mission in some way more than 8 days. So I was able to help start a golf tournament fundraiser for the James Project and stay in
Mhm,
contact with the director, Tiffany, of the project, and really continue to act out those steps of faith through serving the project here in the States. So, all of that is just faith in action that I learned
mm,
from going on a mission trip.
mhm. And I feel like listening to where you were before you left and then where you were when you got back, it feels like it's like a accelerator. Do you know what I mean? Like the
Yeah,
trip,
it almost
like
feels
the
like a coming of age too.
mm, yeah.
And
Mhm.
and
But
and 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 not finding my true passion in faith and walk in faith until my mid-20s. Again, it's something I felt very behind on, right? I didn't feel like my husband went to a Christian school, so like in comparison, he knows a lot about the history and the timelines of the Bible and things like that, and I didn't. And I felt it was intimidating to be in Bible studies sometimes with people my age that had been in the church for longer and they knew all of these things, and it was hard to not feel like I wasn't a good enough Christian, right? I wasn't that perfectionist mentality snuck in, and but then you go on a mission trip and you realize there's so many other ways than just being able to quote the Bible and in the history. Um, there is a lot of value in studying that and understanding that and growing that knowledge, that factual knowledge.
Mhm,
But that is not the faith and action part. And that is more important.
mhm. Well, and really just remembering that we're all in different phases of our walk with God. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And comparison is such a thief of joy. And so just being okay with where we're at and our growth pattern and not comparing to others is hard to do sometimes. But it's better for us, I think, you
Yes,
know?
yes.
Yeah.
Still very
Mhm.
hard, but yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But it does, even if you said coming of age too, but even for anyone in their faith walk, it feels like a trip like this because you're just like the immersion of it. You go from, a knowledge level of 2 to 8 in a
Hmm.
week, you know what I mean, as far as your faith, and it just really seems to expedite our spiritual growth when we go
Yes.
and we get to live it out like that. Mm,
And
yeah.
time and time again, too. It's the
Mhm,
first time is huge, but then every time you go, you never know what you're going to see. You never know where God's going to speak to you. And,
mhm,
the intentionality of just being like, okay, God, talk to me. Like you're leading the way here. Um,
mhm,
it's not easy to do on a mission trip, but it really teaches you what that feels like.
mhm,
So transitioning that back into your everyday life of,
mhm.
as we were kind of talking of learning where that fits, of being like, okay, God, show me the way today. My
Right.
heart, my hands are open. Let's go.
Mhm.
Um, it's
Yeah.
it's it's really special.
Yeah, yeah, and just trying to make sure that we're doing that in everything that we do, whether it's, at church in a ministry type of setting, or if it's at the grocery store, or,
Hmm.
picking up an order at Walmart, or,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, yeah, it is. The growth can really be, amazing. I was thinking it back to I'm so impressed with the way you handled your first trip, because the way I handled my first trip was not like that.
Well, how was your first trip?
Yeah, it was great, but I felt like more of, because we kind of decided at the last possible moment that we were going. So we hadn't joined the team with fundraisers and different things throughout the process,
Mhm.
um, until the very end. So I felt similar, like I was behind and everyone else knew what was going on, and I was kind of like an outside observer to this experience. And my mom had been 12 years prior when they were just building. They started the foundations for the first homes on the land, but she hadn't been back since. So there was that aspect of it as well, that I was not trying to, I was enjoying seeing the trip through her eyes, and seeing the fact that she when she was there the first time, there wasn't even a tree on the property besides the Save a Tree. There was just
Mhm.
barren land and they were building to what it is now, and this was 7 years ago. And then also trying to navigate, my children on this trip. My daughter was the youngest. It was a group of teenagers, teenage girls. So they felt like they treated her like a 10-year-old because they're teenagers, you know what I mean? So there was
Yeah.
that aspect of it. So I'm trying to make sure she's not feeling too left out. And then my son wants nothing to do with me because there's an older teen boy and he's like, no, you leave me alone. I'm fine. So there were just all these other factors to my first trip that I just felt like I was just trying to take it all in and just observe and figure out what am I supposed to be doing? Do you because
Yeah,
there were
I get it.
so many different roles. I was a daughter, I was a mom, I was a teammate, like trying to
Hmm.
sort all that out. So I don't feel like I really soaked it in like I should have, as far as and participated like I should have. Do you know, or like I wish
Right.
that I had. I probably did what I could at the time. But fast forward 7 years, and the last 2 years, they've let me do a whole little sermon at church on Sunday, at the project. So it just the growth is very different. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yes.
nice to see the growth. But yeah, reflecting on my first trip, I was like, I even apologized to my team leader. I'm like, I was a terrible teammate. Like I didn't say out loud. I didn't jump in. I didn't. I mean, we had a big team and he wasn't critical of me or anything. Not
Yeah.
not openly. He probably was thinking it, but
But I think that's a good leader there too. And it's like part of going into it is that you've got to meet everybody where they are too. So
right.
if
Hmm.
you bring a team and not everybody can participate, I mean, sometimes people get too hot and they need to go lay down or just little
Right.
things like that. It's
Hmm.
not about being like, oh, they couldn't participate at every moment or their heart just felt like it was focused on something else. You were
Hmm.
called to that mission trip for a reason.
Hmm.
And
Right.
God made you take the steps and put in the work to go all the
Hmm.
way to Guatemala, Monjas, Guatemala, and be there. And whether you're, jumping all in on everything, you're all in is that you made it and you're there to listen. And, you're still talking about God all week. You're still seeing Him. And it's okay to be on the sidelines and watch. Sometimes
Right.
that's what we need to learn about ourselves. So,
Right, right. And it was so much more impactful. I mean, I think it was impactful for all of us, but my kids, I mean, they'll tell you that's the birthplace of their faith because we had
wow.
been studying the Bible, homeschooling, we'd been studying the Bible since they were little and doing different things and serving in our area, whether that was delivering meals or whatever. But for them, it really solidified their faith. And they've been back every year with me. With my son hasn't been back for the last couple because he's trying to start a business. But um so it was really I'm glad that we stepped out in faith and did that, and I'm glad for what I see in them as a result. um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I just think back and think I I could have done better. I think it's a good spectrum to show people, because I like the first team that I led a few years ago, they were all introverts and they would tell you that. So
Yeah.
they while they were super willing to do whatever I asked them to do, they weren't jumping in. So that really
Hmm.
challenged me to have to step up, and because I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable either, more than they are. I mean, they were
Right.
already in a foreign country for their first time, many of them. So it really helped me to grow in that area as well and step up my game as far as like being willing to step out. And so, yeah, I
Hmm.
think no matter where people are in their faith journey and where and what they're ready to participate in or not participate in, I think it's a good picture of the spectrum, you know?
Yes. And I think that's a good point, is nobody should be deterred from going. I understand that and not everybody's going to be called to go. But to say, "Oh, I'm an introvert. I don't know if I'd fit in for with a group for a week," or to say, "Oh, I'm not really, a busybody, so I don't know how I'd do on a mission trip, like doing work all day." Like finding these excuses that really are, yes, but it's God calling you to go learn from this experience. Like everybody who goes will be closer to God, whether they know it or not when they leave. And
Mhm.
you don't even have to be Christian to go. You can be anybody. Um,
Mhm.
you can go listen to the messages. You don't have to give the sermons. It's a
Mhm.
powerful thing when you feel empowered to be the one that speaks in front of everybody, reading scripture and teaching it. Um, but if that's not where you are, the mission
Mhm.
trip will meet you there.
Yeah. 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 And it does. God knows what, I mean, he's not surprised by us when we get there, whether we're jumping
Right.
in or sitting back. He knows what he's gotten into when he's chosen us. So he's not surprised at all either. So we shouldn't
Hmm.
be. I just look back and it's very much the perfectionist mindset. You look back and you're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I could have done so much better." Yeah. I also forgot, yeah, there was another role I was playing. So one of my roommates was someone I went to high school with, but she was not a Christian growing up, and I didn't walk
Hmm.
out my faith in high school. So that was a whole different dynamic too, because we had a different relationship. So it was just like for me, there were just so many things going on and so many different roles that I was trying to figure out
Yeah.
how to play them all at the same time. So yeah.
I know. But I love the relationships that are from my prior years before really walking in my faith. And I mean, I was wild in college to say the least. And but now I go back to a lot of those friendships and we bond most over our experiences at church and through mission work and things like that. So uh it's it's really great. So I love that you shared that you actually got to go on a mission trip with one of them. I would love to take my group of friends from college and do mission work together because
Yeah.
I know we're all Christ followers now and we do our best to walk that way and live that way. And what a fun thing it would be to party and mission work.
Right, right. Yes, I know. And this last year, I got to take one of my oldest friends. I've known her since we were 6, and she got to go on my team. And it was just such a wonderful thing to experience with her. You know, it
Yeah,
was really, yeah.
good.
So yeah, friendships are great. Going on missions trips with friends is awesome
Yeah,
because then
yeah.
you don't come back feeling so lonely either because you have that connection point where you can reach out and be
Hmm.
like, remember when we did this? I need to be reminded or something like that. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what other kind of changes did you experience when you came back? You talked about um, before you were, did you start maybe being more bold, sharing your faith at church or in different scenarios? I mean, the impact to your marriage, that kind of stuff. What was different? What other?
Yeah, like definitely more bold in sharing my faith, but more confident. So, I'm I always say the devil works in strange ways that we won't always see him. It won't always be obvious, right? Like we know like you oh that was rape. So yes, I know that's evil, that's bad. But the way words are twisted in our minds or the way we forget to stop and listen to people's stories before we, teach them or we're quick to judge. Uh, all of those things are very hard to separate if you're not confident in your God, if you're not confident in who God is and that he sacrificed his son for us. And if you once you truly know that and embody that, and not everybody's going to have a holding a woman in a church moment on a mission trip, but you will have something similar.
Mhm,
And I think that allows me to go out and talk with people who aren't Christian and
mhm,
makes me a much better listener to hear their story versus judging their story.
mhm,
Because you a lot of times, I mean, you learn from the kids. Like if you talk to these teenage girls and you're like, oh, they had sex at 12 years old. Well, that's not
mm,
the story, right?
right. Mhm,
And so uh, you've got to be patient with people and give them space to know that they are loved. And
mhm,
then you're able to say, I was able to be patient with you and listen because God taught me that.
mhm,
Now let's talk about God.
mhm, mhm.
And that's definitely that was a big change, and like I said, it wasn't right away. It took a lot of time and understanding to know that that's how I grew, but that was a
Mhm.
change.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's what I try to explain to my kids about what you're saying is understanding the why behind the what. Don't judge
Hmm.
someone unless you've walked through that same exact experience and you know for sure that you could do better, that you have proof that you did better, because you don't really know until you've had that experience what it might be like for you and how you might respond. So understanding, because that's what it sounds like you're saying, listening enough to understand the why behind the what
Hmm.
of their circumstances. Because I mean, recall that same that 12-year-old girl that had that baby you were talking about. When she had her C-section in the hospital, they assumed she was promiscuous, right? The doctor and the
Hmm.
nurses, and they were giving her a really hard time. And it wasn't until the social worker really explained to them that no, 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 this was rape by her father. And then they felt really horrible, so being less quick to judge and more slow to understand why someone is in the position that they're in. Why are they experiencing what they're experiencing, and
Hmm.
not judging that, but listening and understanding that, I think is
Hmm.
really important.
Well, I mean, we have to understand that it's not our position to judge. We don't,
Right.
even after we listen, we don't.
Exactly.
That is not our call. Our call
Hmm.
is to say, oh, that sounds really terrible, or that's an interesting fact of your life.
Hmm.
How does it align with God?
Hmm.
Because the instant we start putting judgment on it, we're going to make people think that God is not a loving God.
Right.
And that is not what that is not, my personal opinion, is not our calling.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's not what he meant when he said, to judge wisely. That's not
Right,
he meant.
right.
It's not what he meant.
I think he meant more discernment there, right?
Exactly, exactly. Yes. Yeah, and making sure that we can, because they'll tune out to anything we have to say about God if that's how we're coming across, that we're
Hmm.
judging them for their circumstances rather than being understanding and compassionate and expressing God's love to them, because God loves them no matter what their circumstances are or what situation that they find themselves in. And he
Hmm.
knows the why behind the what and wants to heal whatever it is that caused them to, experience what they're experiencing, and we're to be his hands and feet. So yeah, judgment doesn't come into play there.
Right.
It'd be hard sometimes though, you know.
Yes. It's very hard
Hmm.
sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to like, as a mom, whenever I would go to the grocery store or something, I tried to, with my kids, I try to like plan it just right, like between
Yeah.
naps and all those things. And inevitably, every single time that I was tempted to judge another mom from a screaming child, in the grocery store, like, well, she didn't,
Yeah.
within a week, that was me. You know what I mean? So it was
Yep.
like reminding me, mm, it's not always, you can't always control it, and you shouldn't judge others for where they're at. So that's just, I mean, it's not a God, not a faith thing, but it's the
Right.
same idea of judgment.
Yes, right. Yeah,
So,
exactly. Judgment
yeah.
slips
Yeah.
in.
Hmm. Because we're
Hmm.
human. Yeah.
Yep.
And we often think that we have figured it out.
We do. And I think we need to be just as aware of stopping and asking for forgiveness and insight into what am I doing wrong? Because
Right.
something feels off and I'm not clearly seeing my sins, but
Mhm.
uh I'm feeling anger, I'm feeling resentment, and I don't know why. Well, those things are, not God speaking to our heart, or maybe they are, but he wants us to come to him. So,
Right. Right. Yeah. I hear you. You had also mentioned prior, when we discussed things, that your trip going down often redirects your life path. And is that what you mean when you're talking about these kinds of things, like the things that you've learned, you're able to reflect from that trip, and it redirects how you respond to people now?
yeah, I think it's like a reset button, if you are feeling burnt out on work and things, you need a
Mhm.
vacation, you need to go away. And for your faith, we tend to create bubbles, as we do with anything else, of,
Mhm.
this is my church community, these are my Bible study people. You kind of learn and teach with the same people in the same circle. And you might serve and you might see a different face while you're serving food or things like
Mhm.
that. But it's really kind of that same, everybody has a teaching method in the words and the styles that they use. And if you live in that bubble, then that's all you're hearing. So then when you go on a mission trip, you hear people talking about the same God and your same beliefs, but they might just use words in a different order, or there's
Mhm.
different opportunities to use those actions of service. There's different ways to act out your faith. And so it's really refreshing, and that you can come back, and you can come back to your faith bubble, and you can say, look at the new perspective, and it's,
Mm,
the new arrangement of words. It's the same message and it's the same learning, but maybe we can reach more people because we can say it this way, and it's
mhm,
and maybe somebody's mind will click and they'll understand it, or
mhm,
I learned a new way that we can connect people to people through this sort of act of service. And
mm,
um so now we can connect to more people because there's a group of people that understand receiving this way. And so it's
mm.
really, it expands and stretches your faith in that way.
Yeah. And it's just it sounds like an understanding that this faith walk is a constant intentional growth pattern. You know,
Yes, yes,
we're never going to get to the end of it. We just get to keep growing more and more in our faith.
right. And it's an exciting thing. I think, again, going back to the kids, of their constant acceptance and their quick change, because of God's work is the forefront of everything that's done at the project, from educating them to feeding them to, giving them spaces to play and be kids. God is at the front of that mission.
Mhm,
And you can see how quickly they adapt. And how often do we say we're children of Christ, right? I'm a child of
yeah,
Christ. And
mhm,
no matter your human age, your age on earth, you are still a child of God. And
mhm,
we need to keep that curiosity and that adaptability of, yes, we need to always have a sound heart on that, who God is and that He is our Savior.
mhm,
And from there, we need to be willing to have conversations and learn and challenge. And
mhm.
it's very, very important to grow up.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think we run into problems when we think we've made it at some point, like we've been in church long enough, or we've read enough verses, or we've memorized enough verses, or whatever it is that we think we've done enough of. And I think
Right?
that it's a there is there's constant growth, but God is so gracious not to show us everything we need to grow in all at once, because it would be very
Yes.
overwhelming. So I know from my experience, I've had seasons of, oh, just this one thing just thrown in my face, just a reminder that this is an area I really need to grow in. And I
Yeah.
work with him and work with him and work with him. And then when I've overcome that, I get a little reprieve from the constant growth that you kind of feel in that season. But then after a little bit, there's another thing that comes up, and I,
Hmm.
I joke with, I always get frustrated when I'm talking to my kids. I'm like, "Oh, I thought I was further along in this." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we think that we've done all this work, but there's just more to be done because we're constantly getting pruned, in a
Right.
good way.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. I love the analogy of pruning and being fruitful.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I was listening to a sermon once, and the person was saying, you're pruned if you do and pruned if you don't, because that verse talks about, I
Yeah.
prune the branches that don't provide fruit, and then I prune the ones that do to provide better fruit. So
Yeah.
you accept that that's part of the journey. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So part of the journey too is the financial giving piece. You were talking about how when you started, it was really a stretch for you, and your husband was willing to do that, and you started your marriage off in that pattern or mindset of generosity. And so speak to that a little bit. Like, how does that, because that's also a growth thing, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
hard when you first start out to be like, what do you mean I have to give money? And
Hmm.
people really struggle with that don't have a faith, or that only think that churches are out to get money, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a tough thing for people to reconcile sometimes. Like, why does
Yeah.
God want my money?
And admittedly, that is something that's probably one of the hardest things in my faith walk. I think because, well, I don't really need to theorize, but I just need to acknowledge that it is really, really hard for me. Um, we need to do it because it's hard.
Mm,
It's hard to get something that seems to make life easier, and it seems to make to make money isn't happiness, but um it does certainly seem sometimes that if you have plenty of resources and then you can add fun things on top of it, that that is what you want to use your money for. So to get rid of that and to have worked very, very hard for it, as a majority
Mhm.
of people do, um, it's it's a very hard line of being selfish and feeling like you need it. But that's why
Mhm.
it's important, because you need to discern between what a need is and, are my needs covered? Yes. Okay, then I have enough to give.
Mhm.
And um, there's people that don't have their needs covered. That's where you need to give.
Right. Well, and I think it's a battle of that self-reliance. You know what I mean? And God
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want us to be self-reliant. He doesn't want us to depend on money for our needs to be met. We need it. He knows we need it, but that's not ultimately where he wants us to put our faith, is in our
Right.
ability to make enough money to, because really the job that we have that provides the money is something he provided. And so
Right.
just constantly reminding us where the source of all of this comes from, instead of feeling that temptation to be self-reliant and
Yes,
put
that's a
him
really
out of.
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a walk of obedience. And it's a in my opinion, it's one of those, because we started tithing when it was challenging, and
Mm-hmm.
it was that trust that I'm gonna obey this because I feel like you've put it on my heart to do, but I gotta trust that you're gonna make up for the difference where we're lacking. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Where it's really tight. And you do the things you need to do, you budget, you make a grocery list and a menu to, keep the
Mm-hmm.
dollar amount down. You do your part, but then you obey and you trust that God's going to make up the difference where he needs to. And so,
Yeah.
in my life, he's always been faithful to do that. So I'm grateful
Mm-hmm.
for the opportunity to grow in that area of trusting him, because
Mm-hmm.
any area of our life that we aren't willing to give over to him is a source of temptation for us to idolize, I think, and to hold on to too
Yes.
tightly.
And money
And
is definitely, I think, something that is so idolized and such a distractor from
mhm.
walking in faith. And yeah, it's a really strong point that you make of
Yeah, it's a very
how that makes
mature.
us closer to him to give. And I think too, like we were saying, if you churches have connections too. So just giving to church or giving to nonprofits,
Right.
like
Mhm.
that is to grow faith. So, trust
Mhm.
the communities that you have around you, but know that you're growing God's community. So
Mhm. Mhm. And Jesus actually talks a ton about money, and there are
mhm.
hundreds of verses in the Bible about money, and it's not by accident. I think that God knew that it knows that that's a very big temptation for us to rely on, and
Yeah.
how it can really stunt our growth when we do.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
so.
Because how often do we say, I need money? I need more money. I need
Mhm.
money for that. And
Mhm.
truly to live, we don't need money. Like,
Mhm.
yes, and to function in society, we need money, but to
Right.
truly live with God, we don't need money.
Right. Right. Yeah. My daughter is so funny. She's never cared that much about money, and I interviewed her for a podcast once because she's been down there so many years, and she asked, and she was like, "I want to be that missionary that has no money," and I'm like, "God, you got to provide for me because you don't want
Yeah.
your girl out on the street."
That's a
She said,
good ambition though. That's awesome.
"No," she's like, "I don't want to have to worry about it," and I'm like, "Well, good for
Yeah.
you."
But he does I mean, through we talked about it already, like how I feel when I did that survey. Like God provided. I
Right.
didn't have the money
Mhm.
and I needed $150 and somehow
Mhm.
I walked into it, but it wasn't by
Right.
accident.
Mhm, mhm. And just keeping our eyes out for those sorts of things, and recognizing that that is God showing up for us. They're not just coincidences when we need them. They are
Yeah.
God's provision. And when we are willing to give him a percentage of our money, and recognize that it's his to begin with, that helps us, I think, keep our eyes open for those opportunities. I mean, you think about the kings in the Old Testament. When they got comfortable, it was, I built this kingdom. I did all of this.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And so they it's real easy to set God aside when you don't need him in that same way, like they
Yes.
did when they were in the midst of battles and they couldn't have won without him, once they got
Yes.
comfortable, they're like, it was all me, I'm amazing.
Right.
And we have a tendency to do the same thing. You'd think we could
Hmm.
learn from history a little bit better, but that's
But,
the growth process.
like we said, it's a journey. We've got to keep on that walk and expanding. So,
Yes, yes, I know. So, since that first trip, you've become very involved in the ministry. What do you think? I mean, I think you've kind of touched on this, but tell us a little bit about why you decided to invest more of your time and your energy and your focus into the project.
because their messaging is so clear that God is first. So, um, there is opportunities to bring kids into a community and say, "Oh, you came from a terrible background. Let's just make everything perfect for you. Let's give you education, and let's give you nice clothes, and let's give you a fancy house to live in." But that's not what the project does. The project says, you've struggled. We're going to teach you what a loving Christian home is.
Mhm,
We value education, and that will be part of the program, but just as much as going to church will be, right? That's going to
mhm,
be just as important. And God is there through every step of the way. The project doesn't try to bring American culture into Guatemalan society. The project tries to understand Guatemalan society and grow where God isn't. And through expansions of church planting and through redeemed women's programs and through the children's program and through the community outreach. When kids leave the program, we are able to stay in contact with some of their families and help them, establish a loving Christian home. So,
mhm,
since there was so much broad focus that said, okay, God first, how do we grow a community of people who know how to act like God? And, that's enough right there because it's a great
mhm.
representation of it.
Yeah, yeah, it is a wonderful, wonderful example of that. So, what would you say is the return on investment for you of your involvement?
Priceless? My soul? I mean, that's a really big and hard question. Um, the return, I don't I don't look at it as trying to get a return on investment, and I think that is the return.
Mhm,
So it's so easy with the project and to love these kids and the people of Guatemala that you really feel that true sacrificial um, desire to give part of yourself and part of your resources in any way that you can, and that you don't expect something in return.
mhm,
So to say what is the return on it, the return is that you're not seeking anything but God in the end.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. And but I think I guess what I mean by that is like, what has been the return on investment in your own life and your own faith journey too? Because being that invested, people, like
Yeah.
when I was talking to Jim and we were talking about Tiffany and Brian and giving up their whole lives to go down there and selling everything. And he was like so impressed by that. I'm like, yeah, well, some people say they're crazy.
Yeah.
So it's a different perspective. So, um, it, what makes you want to, like, what keeps you doing it, I guess? What's the return on investment that keeps you sacrificing your time and your energy and your focus? Like, what
um
is it that you get out of it?
a relationship with God. I
Mm,
think I would struggle a lot more in that relationship. I know I would if I didn't have the opportunities to serve through the project and the life-giving experiences that it's offered. And
yeah.
so yeah, and I told you I had that moment hugging a woman, and if I ever struggle, I have that. I have that.
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think that's why the Bible tells us it is much better to give than to receive because
Mhm.
and I've tell my kids that a lot of times that this life of following God is sacrificial for sure, but it's almost underlying that it's almost selfish because the way the purpose and the joy that you experience by following God is the return. Do you know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's almost you keep doing it because it's so fulfilling. Do you know, like
Mm-hmm.
that weird economy of you give up your life to find it, you know?
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. So, what advice do you think you would give to someone who's thinking about any part of this, whether it's going on a vision trip or going on a mission trip with a group that they might barely know,
Mhm.
or even just giving to the project? What kind of advice would you give to someone?
I mean, I would definitely say do it. Don't think about it too much because if you're planning, especially if you're planning a mission trip or going to Guatemala or something, that can feel a little bit overwhelming if you put too much
Yeah.
thought on all of the tiny little details.
Yeah.
But God takes care of all those details. And I think through this entire conversation, you can see the small details add up to that that improved relationship with God. And if you want a relationship with God, donate it, get involved with the project, go on a mission trip. If you want to improve your relationship with God, if you just want to see a beautiful country and feel what it feels like to serve people, and maybe you're not ready to accept God, just do it. My advice is just do it. Take the chance, take the experience, and
Mm.
I've
See what comes of it.
yet to hear somebody say they regretted it. So,
No, I don't think I've ever encountered anyone on the, 7 different trips I've been on with teams. I've never heard anyone say, "Oh, I wish I hadn't done this."
yeah, yeah. And a
And there's
lot of people try to go back.
Mhm, mhm. Yes, many of those are returning people. So yeah, I have one from my team the last 2 years that she's been down with me in August, and then she goes down with our previous team in February. So she's been
Oh, wow.
twice every year for several years. So, I'm a little jealous of her, but she's
Yeah.
down there right now, actually. She's, been sharing pictures with us, so I'm very
Oh,
happy for her.
good.
Yeah, and she's disappointed she waited as long to go down because
Yeah.
she's, because it was the team that we went with had been going down since my mom led the team so
Mm-hmm.
many years ago, almost 20 years ago. And so she hadn't, she had just kept saying, "I'm not doing it, I'm not doing it." And when she finally did, she was like, "I don't know why I waited this long. I wish I had
Yeah.
come down so much sooner." So yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of those things you can't know till you go. So
Right.
everybody
So
should
just
go.
go.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Mm.
All right. Did we miss anything that you wanted to cover?
I don't think so. I think we covered everything. I don't have another part of my soul I can share today.
Well, thank you for bearing it all and sharing it with humility because I think it's so important to be willing to share where we do struggle, whether it's
Yes.
with being willing to give or any of it. That it's people need to see that side of Christians to know that it's not like it's a walk in the park every day. We do have
Yeah.
struggles. We do have to push ourselves. We do have to intentionally choose to grow in our discomfort, and it's not always easy. So thank you for
Yeah.
being humble enough to share those spaces for you.
You're
It's
welcome.
good.
Yeah, I
Good.
think an example of imperfection is good teachers sometimes. So
Mhm.
I'll
Yeah.
share all my problems with you.
Let's do a problem podcast.
Well, it helps me talk through it too. So, now I can have a different mindset. So,
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Caroline, and all the things that you do for the project and the women and children down there, and your willingness to sacrifice for them on a daily basis. They're blessed to have you.
I would say the same about you, Kathy. Thanks for all that you do.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.